Hello, my name is Beatrice Ofebia Awuku from the University of Ghana, Legon. The topic of my talk is Agency and Processes in the Pandemic, Confronting COVID-19 Through Presidential Addresses. This will be the format of my presentation. So I'll start with a little bit of introduction and then to my research questions. From there to the literature review, then the methodology for the study, the analysis, and then some references. The introduction. With the outbreak of the novel coronavirus pandemic, it became necessary for certain key individuals in society or stakeholders and the government to play some crucial roles, such as taking up some responsibilities to bring solutions to the whole pandemic situation. Now, consequently, it became very imperative that leaders of nations address their citizenry, focusing specifically on precautions while we were waiting for a vaccine at the time. According to Hinckley 1990, heads of state or presidents of nations over the time have come to be considered as common fathers or mothers of their citizens who are laden with the responsibility of giving care to the citizens who are seen as their little children. And because they represent the people and thus should speak for them, their voices are taken as the voices of the people. This is in agreement with Appiah 2015, who says that language used in a presidential speech is not only a medium of communication, but also a social phenomenon by which reality is socially constructed. This study therefore seeks to investigate language use in the presidential addresses on COVID-19 to decipher how the President of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, construes the realities of the real world of the pandemic and construes his values and his system of beliefs, as well as that of the other participants in the discourse, as a way of confronting COVID-19 in Ghana. So by applying the transitivity system, an aspect of Halliday's systemic functional grammar, this study is an attempt to explore the linguistic choices used in two of the presidential addresses on COVID-19, focusing on the process types and the participants and the communicative implications embedded in them. My research questions. This study is guided by three research questions, and they are: what are the predominant process types in the president's addresses on COVID-19? What are the predominant participants in the president's addresses on COVID-19? And then what does the transitivity pattern reveal about how COVID-19 is being confronted in Ghana? The data for this study forms part of political discourse, which is categorized into two parameters by Schaffner, which is functional and thematic. Now, the presidential addresses on the COVID-19 can be considered both functional and thematic. And this is because these addresses satisfy a specific function of the pandemic. And at the same time, they treat topics related to political activities and political ideas. In examining presidential speech in terms of power and resistance, Tilton and Schaffner 1997 explained that political action can be linguistic and can have four categories of strategic functions. And these functions are coercion, resistance, oppression or protest, legitimization and delegitimization, and then finally representation and misrepresentation. Now, the third and final strategic functions are very relevant to this study, which is the legitimization and delegitimization, and then representation and misrepresentation. They define legitimization and delegitimization as the expressions that create a climate for obedience and control, such as appeals to voters' will and legality. And then they explain representation and misrepresentation as characterized by representations of reality representations of events and information, and in this case, the reality of the COVID-19. In the presidential addresses, the president appeals to the voters' will, as well as present information about COVID-19 and the reality of it to Ghanaians. Van Leeuwen 2012 proposes that it will be a fruitful venture for the analysis of political discourses to focus on other grammatical phenomena as well, rather than generally focusing on linguistic means that can be used to hide nominalization, passivization, and informatization. Therefore, the transitivity framework becomes a workable tool in exploring how the reality of COVID-19 is encoded in these presidential speeches. The methodology. The data for the study was retrieved from the Ghana Health Service website, read and broken down into the various clauses. From there, the information and the data relevant to the study, which are the process types and the participants, were then selected and analyzed using Burton's 1982 steps in analyzing the text. These steps are, first of all, determining what sorts of processes there are and which participant is engaged in which type of process, and verifying who or what is affected or seems to be affected by the process. For effective analysis, quantitative research approach was used to assist in answering the first two research questions. And to answer the third question, qualitative research approach was used to aid in describing the data by looking at emerging themes and patterns of the data to achieve the set out purpose of the study. The data was then coded into the process types. So for instance, the material process was coded as MAT, the relational process as REL, the mental process as MENT, the verbal process as VERB, the behavioral process as VEH, and then the existential process as EXT. Now to the analysis. At the end of the statistical analysis, 137 processes were identified, and 183 participants were also identified. All these process types, all the 6 process types within the transitivity framework were found in the data, though behavioral and existential were quite insignificant. Now to the material process. The material processes, which are the processes of action and doing, are the predominant process types identified. And this predominance is attributed to the fact that the presidential address is concerned with representing actions and events and the participants that are involved in them. So the dominant actor was the president, represented by the pronoun I. There was God, the Ghanaian populace, which was represented by the pronoun we, and some ministries, such as the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Trade, and the Ministry of Local Government. So examples of the material processes identified in the data, MAT1 says, I have come into your homes again this evening. The next one says, to provide an update to combat the coronavirus, I am going to be providing you regular updates. We must do everything within our power to contain the virus. These are examples identified in the data. Now, one interesting thing I noted is that even though the coronavirus is claiming a lot of lives around the globe, it remains very passive in these addresses, and it is not given any agent role at all. This hints at the president's effort not to give the virus prominence as the aim of the updates is to eradicate COVID-19 completely from our land. Now, the goal, which are the participants affected by the action of the verb, as used in the data, include schools, public gatherings, distance learning, and the predominant one of these goals was school. This shows how our educational system has been awfully hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, and also throws light on how passionate the president is about education. So examples are all universities, senior high schools, and basic schools, public and private, will be closed down Monday, 16th March 2020 till further notice. The Minister of Education, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, and examples like these. Now, to the relational process, it is the second highest identified, and they were largely career and attribute, with verb forms such as is, are, will be, etc. The president is predominantly characterized and identified in the career participant position, hinting on his identity and the relationship that exists between him and his job as the leader of the nation in the attributive position. So examples are, and I am confident that together by the grace of God, I am reliably informed, I am encouraged by the numbers of Ghanaians, and examples like these. In other attributive positions, the president shows his appreciation and gratitude towards parties and entities that are helping him one way or another in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. By establishing a common ground using the relational process, the president has been able to dismantle the fear of alienation and closing the gap between himself and the people whom he leads. Now, the verbal process. Largely occupying the sayer position is the president, of course. He is given the speech, so he is found, saying most of the things, while the people he's addressing, the Ghanaians, are the addressees. The citizens are in the receiver position of the saying, while the protocols are outlined by the WHO in the fight against the COVID-19 were mostly the verbiage. The president is perceived to profess and avow his commitment in protecting the citizens of Ghana from dying from the COVID-19. He is not only being persuasive, but also logical as he pledges himself to provide the framework and the master plan to eradicate COVID completely. The mental process. The trend of mental processes found in the data reveals the thought processes and the consciousness of the president. The mental process of cognition dominated the data, and this uncovers the president's observations and thoughts about the whole pandemic. In a global pandemic bedeviled by devastation and destruction, it is imperative that the President of the Republic, who occupies the highest office of the land, to tell Ghanaians what he has observed, what he feels, what he thinks, and what he wishes to do in order to address the situation. Some of the examples of mental process found in the data we have, you may recall that on Wednesday, 12th March 2020, we have, after deliberations, I have decided in the interest of the public and safety, in the interest of public safety and the protection of our population, we have establishments such as markets, shopping malls, restaurants, nightclubs should observe enhanced hygiene procedures. We have to observe prescribed social distancing and good personal hygiene and the like. Now, the censor position is occupied by you, which refers to the citizens. This call on the citizens to be part of this process draws on the democracy that is practiced in Ghana. He is seen as appealing to our senses to achieve a persuasive effect. Hence, the majority of the phenomena associated with the mental process emphasize the protocols outlined by the WHO. As I said earlier, the numbers for the behavioral and existential were very insignificant, so I didn't account for those in the study. Now, to sum it all up, the dominant process type is the material process, with the president and the government as the major agents in confronting COVID-19. Observe that the president is the major actor He positioned himself as the leader of the nation and makes a collective call on Ghanaians and other agencies, both governmental and non-governmental, to come on board to eradicate COVID-19. Presidential speeches given in a time of crisis as crisis or pandemics are not everyday occurrences. Therefore, this study provides a perspective on the language used by political leaders in times of crisis, specifically an understanding about the linguistic strategies that President Akufo-Addo used in his addresses as a way of confronting COVID-19 in Ghana. I have some references here. Thank you very much for your attention.